tuning into Power Athlete Radio. If you've been following this program for any length of time, you know that it has no format and blurs the line between information and entertainment. In keeping with that theme of having absolutely no theme, we welcome the most interesting man in the world, patriarch and father of Power Athlete founder, Robert Alden Welbourn. That's right, this week John's dad is here to talk about, well, basically everything. In this episode, Mr. Welbourn takes us through the Welbourn genealogy, the history since the dawn of man, and throws in some thought-provoking pearls of wisdom for good measure. And if I may take a moment to get a little bit sentimental, we all thought this podcast would prove to be just another fad, like the internet or pockets. And despite our having initial reservations about its success, we are grateful for you, the roughly tens of millions of listeners who tune in every week. And with that, I bring you this, the 200th episode of Power Athlete Radio.
Power Athlete Nation, what is up? Or what? Right? Is that still cool?
No, it's not cool anymore. It's totally played.
You have Luke, John, Tex. We're sitting around with a special guest. We're in Camp Welbourn, and we're going to deliver you the 200th, technically 201st, but 200th episode of the premier podcast in strength and conditioning.
Conditioning.
So what's up?
Nothing. I just am amazed that we're sitting here at 200 episodes. I mean, it really just seems like one really long episode, but the fact that we have effectively reached 200 episodes is amazing. Mm-hmm. And I'm even more stoked that we get to have our 200th episode with my dad sitting here, so we get to talk a little bit. So while this is the premier podcast in strength and conditioning, I hope you guys realize that this probably will go all over the map as we normally do.
Yeah, this is the subject matter.
Yeah, the subject matter.
Yeah, we don't even have to talk about strength and conditioning to be a premier podcast. But Bob Welbourn is here.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate being here for this momentous occasion.
That's right.
200 episodes. I can remember when John merely talked about this and put together maybe one or two of the first ones, and they just seem to have blossomed forth, and he's often shared with me some of the very famous people that he's been able to interview and the things that they brought to the program. And,
well, the best was my dad was like, so wait a minute, so you just turn on a microphone and you talk to people, like interview them? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, what do you guys talk about? I'm like, we're supposed to talk about strength and conditioning, but a lot of times we don't talk about strength and conditioning. Mm-hmm. We really just talk about whatever's pertinent at that point. And I think what we've done a great job on, and while I view most other podcasts as fucking hacks, I think what we've
like
done,
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, Joe Rogan hack. I think what we've done really well is create a interesting, just a banquet of bank of people that have really come to our podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's really all over the map. As we were doing some prep for this the other day, I'm looking back and just trying to think at how we ran over these people, and what I realized, it was a lot like Forrest Gump and his feather. Mm-hmm. We just, as time went on, we met different people and invited them on, and it allowed us to go to one person and go down, and it's really been just an opportunity for us to not only learn and progress, but for us to create some really great relationships.
Yeah, for sure.
What I've enjoyed is just the ability to scratch an itch. If we have a question or there's something that our research, we can't answer it, we just find who wrote the research, who did this, who's the leading expert, no matter the field, whether it's nutrition or strength, and I invite them on.
One of my personal favorites is our forage agronomist. Mm-hmm.
Peter
Ballerstedt. My wife and I talk about this all the time whenever we go out and shopping, and like, what's the grass-fed beef versus this, and we're at this whole thing like, what would Peter Ballerstedt do? So the other night we had a birthday party for my son Cash's first birthday, and I barbecued out here, and we went to Costco and got some really bitchin' fillets, and everybody's like, oh, these are so amazing.
It's like, who's this butcher you found here, John?
Yeah, did you find this like like obscure butcher in Dripping Springs that raises these cows by hand? I'm like, no, I bought him at Costco. And Bo was so amazed. Like, wait a minute, what about this? And I'm like, Peter Ballerstedt said. Yes. And I'm like, and that's my deal. So I go back to Peter's deal was pretty amazing, because we had really been working on this within the framework of not only grass-fed meat, sustainable, favorable omega-3 profiles, and I even ironically was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast as he's pumping his beef box or whatever it is, that primal box, and he's talking about higher omega-3s and a lot of the things that we thought for a long time.
Well, what's your true, but it
which is-
marginally.
marginally.
Give
you know.
another lifestyle, like eating a walnut.
Yes, well, that was Peter's thing. If you're eating beef for omega-3s, then don't have a walnut.
Yeah.
Because, those,
Wasn't it crazy? He said if we were to get the best place to get fish oil is from fish. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Just eat some fish.
Yeah. He also said that, that you cannot raise rudiments on anything but foliage. Like, they have to be raised on grass. So, this idea that you're bringing them in, he's like, for the majority of them, it is not cost effective to raise, rudiment animals on anything other than
Grass
and forage, and that they forage, and that's part of their deal. And that, when they have these whole feedlot things, that's like at the end of the cycle when they're taken in, dropped off, and he's like, that really exists, but for the most part, it's pretty accurate.
For the record, this is episode 152, April 22nd, 2016, if you want to archive it.
Yeah, for the Peter Ballerstedt. Yeah, no, he's really good. I mean, but I think about us having really reached out to some people that really don't even do podcasts. Like Matt Lalonde is a guy that refuses to do podcasts because he doesn't want to really deal with not only more questions, humans, and people under about 150 IQ, which basically lobs all of us out other than my dad. And bringing in guys like Matt Lalonde who have such a unique, or Rob Wolf, or we go down. I mean, the other great one too, and I always laugh about was the barefoot running guy.
McDougal.
Yeah. And they reached out to us.
Yeah.
So McDougal reached out to us, and we get this email like, we really love to have McDougal on. And I'm like, didn't that the dude that wrote Born to Run?
Yeah.
Who was an amazing podcast, and somebody that I know we've written down, like, at some point we got to go hang out. He was training for that race where he had
151.
He had to go race with a goat on his back. Remember that? He was training for those goats. So there's a race in Mexico where these guys run, some exorbitant amount of distance, but they have to transport a goat with them, and so they carry their goat on their shoulders. So this guy is he's the guy that went down to Mexico and wrote that book, Running with the Indians that in the Copper Canyon, where these guys basically run hundreds of miles a day and they play these games with running. And he had gone down and lived with them and wrote this book called Born to Run. And New York Times bestseller 100 times over, and really started this idea of barefoot running and getting back to nature. So we had him on our podcast, and he was training for this race where he was have to run with these indigenous people with a goat on his back. So super cool guy. But he was another one taught that idea of like, what is fitness? The ability to be useful, to be able to execute normal tasks. Sitting behind a computer and fighting wars with a return and a space bar isn't real fitness.
Right.
And that was really impactful for me.
Yeah. And then there's the very first episode featuring me, Denny K, and Platic, and the classic cease and desist sent from John Welbourn to our two soldiers who just were trying to help us, get into the podcast.
This is
game.
such bullshit.
So
what happens is Luke has his whole deal where it's better to ask for forgiveness.
Oh, that's my deal. That was like
actually mine.
There's one rule of this company: don't ask permission, just do things and hope it's the right thing. I'm like, okay.
So Luke gives this idea like, hey, we're thinking of starting a podcast. I'm like, it's a fucking terrible idea. It'll never last. Podcasts suck. Nobody listens to that shit. It's a fad like pockets in the internet. And so that's all I heard. Next thing I know, I get like pinged on fucking Instagram, Twitter, all these social media deal, the Power Athlete podcast, and I'm like, what the fuck? I have this shit trademarked. And right about that time, I was in the middle of a bunch of trademark fights with a bunch of dipshit cheerleading academies that were trying to use the word power athlete for their cheerleading schools. And so I'm dealing with these guys. I got I'm writing cease and desist like 6 a week, trying to fight these guys so I can personally keep my legal expense down, because these lawyers over here fucking bleed you dry. So actually when the lawyer that helps us is a buddy of my dad's, and I remember hitting him up and being like, dude, there's no way that I can sustain the amount of money. And he's like, here's what you do. Let's sit down and craft you a letter, create legal, you blast them out. And he goes, if they punk out, great. If they don't, then escalate it. Yeah. He's like, just send the initials. I don't have to do them. Just tap me in when you got to fist fight these guys. And so all of a sudden this thing pops up, and I'm like, I didn't okay a podcast with these guys. I don't know what this is. So instantly I cease and desist the letter to them. And these guys are like, little do I know it's Luke on the other side of this podcast who, so the first podcast I didn't even know about, and I ended up sending a cease and desist to get these guys.
Wasn't the verbiage in the letter not cordial at all? You just went out of your way to say you're going to stomp people and smash them if they don't stop using Power Athlete?
No, it was crafted by an attorney. So attorneys don't use words like
That's why I
cease
thought
and
it was-
destroy.
that's why
No.
I thought I remembered that.
It was very, as it always begins. I'm not sure if you know, but Power Athlete is a federally registered trademark owned by John Welbourn and Power Athlete Incorporated. And whether or not you are aware, the way you're using it is in violation, and therefore puts me into the position of having to take legal action against you for your illegal usage of the mark. Mm-hmm. And so that's how it begins all the time. And then at which point I go in and I tap it in, and then I put I cite it, I show it, screen capture, and give them evidence, and then I cite where I own it, the number, and all that, and then send it out to them. So no, it wasn't like I will fucking end you.
But that is definitely how they read it.
Well,
because
they
called
read it
me,
because
and I was at a cert, and everyone's freaking out, and I'm like, classic misunderstanding.
If you've ever received a letter from an attorney, you guys probably never have ever been on the other side of this. Mm-hmm. But when you receive that letter to the attorney, it's like getting a letter from the IRS or something.
Yeah,
where
I was
you're
gonna say.
Oh God, that's when you're
or even worse, the California State Franchise Tax Board. Those guys are like the mafia.
Oh, you know what? And my dad will giggle about this, but dealing with the California State Franchise Tax Board, we would randomly get a bill for $300, and I would send it to the accountant, and she had no idea what it was, and I was like, well, what do we do? She's like, just pay it. I'm like, why? She's like, well, we'll fight it, but you have to pay it. I'm like, why? She's like, we don't even know what it is. And it was crazy. I remember a year later, I'm like, what was that? She's like, I don't know, but you paid it and they went away, right? I'm like, so you just pay the Franchise Tax Board to go away? She's like, 9 out of 10 times, it's easier just to pay them to go away. And I'm like, she's like, they're like the mob. They're the worst. So, yeah.
Well, you can always sue to recover.
Yeah.
Small claims jurisdiction.
Yeah, the only person I know that has the time, the effort, and the principle to sue them would be you. And you'd be like, oh, no problem. I'll happen to be in court that day. So, yeah, the other cool thing, Jim Wendler we've had on. I can think back, we were talking about my professor, Stephen G. Miller, the foremost expert in the world of ancient athletics, which I think was another great podcast. Mm-hmm. I remember Callie was like, I don't think people are going to like this one. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
We got to get this guy on, and then, we just did another one with Fred Hatfield. So we've had some pretty amazing guests and some pretty unamazing guests, mm-hmm. That I can think back on, which are usually all the people that Tex brings on.
Bert Sorn, I got him on.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
Conference and connections.
It's true. No, it's been an incredible task for a tool for not only networking, but creating a big infrastructure and what's our genealogy, which is to quote Hair Bear. Mm-hmm. So it's been good. Yeah, but that, and then what else has been going on? Just crappy internet here. We're still dealing with no internet, or I'm sorry, the worst internet. Imagine AOL 1995 dial-up in Bangladesh. That's our internet that we have here.
Yeah. Which but I thought the internet was just a fad. Was it something that you've come to rely on, running an online business?
Yes, yeah. Unfortunately, it is. I had some guy send me some hate mail that hey, basically on my Talk to Me Johnny blog, what's wrong? You haven't learned anything? How come you're not putting anything out? I actually emailed him back, and I'm like, my internet is so bad that the only way I can load anything without it crashing is I either have to be at a hotspot or I got to go to Starbucks. Mm-hmm. So the other morning I went and loaded Harry 20. I think I loaded him a year of workouts mm-hmm. at Starbucks, and Harry's like, oh, why does it take so long? I'm like, I cannot physically load or do anything on my computer.
Yeah,
it's unreal. So,
but go for it.
Soon to be cured.
Yeah, soon to be cured.
Well, just saying, what else we got is the Academy and a freaking manual workbook. Oh. It's going to be a collector's item. This podcast really kind of, is really a kickoff here when we're getting ready to launch the first segment of the Power Athlete Academy, which I think is years overdue.
Yes.
And what it's going to do now is going to give people kind of a choose your own adventure opportunity to understand the Power Athlete method, so that when we go out into the world and have in-person seminars, we don't have to sit there and start hammering, chiseling on a tablet the 10 commandments of not only Power Athlete, but really the basis of not only strength conditioning and understanding performance-based training, where people ask questions. It's kind of like we have people all the time on the training, asking questions like, so we got to do this, here's where you start. So I think we've really kind of, it's really overdue. And what I'm really excited too, and I talked to Andy Stump about this the other day when I was in Washington, D.C. doing the deal for the NFL. He called me because he's starting AndyStump.com. As he started his Confessions of an Idiot, which was his blog, which I called him immediately and said, that's the fucking worst name. Call it your name. And so now he's going to start his deal because he's got involved with some public speaking. But, Andy called me and he, we've been kind of kicking around this idea, like we had talked about doing the Masters of Violence, but, with the guys from Black Rifle Coffee, which was kind of a collection of people that were really good at violence and could come in and assess people on their state of readiness for violence. Not only to administer, but to absorb, to understand, and kind of deal with it. But, Andy was pretty funny. He said, there are these guys that are teaching a seminar where I think they do contrast baths and breathing. And I was like, really? And they charge for that? He's like, yeah, they're thousands of dollars. They go on these retreats and, got hot and cold, and then they teach breathing and some basic fitness, and they're paying big money for it. I'm like, man, I can't believe people pay for anything. And he's like, what if there was some form of like retreat seminar or something that we could do, let's say in Montana, where you bring people in and you do like kind of team building, or you put them in like a 2-day situation where you force them into different tasks. Like, here's a map, here's this, orienteering, hey, I need you to make a fire, here's an axe, chop down, all these different things. And then you bring them back, and as they're starting to fail, you bring in people to teach them the skill and then kind of come out. And so Andy was like, what if we did a seminar that was based on not only, some basic survival stuff, but also some understanding of nature, but also, team building, understanding, training, what it looks like, and start helping people to, really start to understand what it takes to not only be, successful here, but successful in other parts. And I was like, dude, it sounds like a great idea. Andy's actually selling his house and moving to Montana.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. So they're moving to Whitefish, whereas his wife grew up in Montana, which we've been to Whitefish. And
yes, we have.
Yeah, we had a family reunion up there.
That's safety had come from Whitefish, the one that...
Timmy Hawk.
Kenny played for the Eagles.
He's one of the coaches for the Eagles.
Yeah.
Timmy's coaching for the Eagles.
Yeah.
There's Ned Ehrlich, who was our workman's comp attorney, who's the head guy for the PA, and he and Timmy were good friends. So, but I think people are, whether it's through podcasts or CrossFit, physical training, people are looking for a way to improve upon themselves. And I think the one thing, even though the internet's a fad, what it's offered people is a way to start searching and seeing not only holes within their own game, or maybe shortcomings, and now how do we start fixing them? I was looking at some of the most Googled terms out there. One of them is, how do I be a better father?
Oh, yeah.
Things like that. And people are asking these questions, and then how are they doing it? Well, all these books come up by all these psychiatrists or psychologists, or some other guy, and actually one of the most impactful books I ever read was a book called Wild at Heart, and that book was really good for me in terms of what it understands to be a father, but also a man, and some of these other things, which goes back to our age-old talk with Harry Shaw. So I think this podcast has been really great, and I'm excited to see if we can make it another 200 episodes, or if this is just the end of the Power Athlete Radio.
Oh, this is our last one?
This is it.
Just bought all those microphones.
So if it dies today, it's my fault.
So no, it's been good. So
Well, let's get some Bob Welbourn.
All right, let's hear that.
There. So give a little background, Bob. Yesterday.
Well, you're talking about me personally, or family, or whatever.
Well, give us a little history on you.
Okay. Well, let's go back. Let's try my name, Robert Alden Welbourn. Well, there was a Robert Alden Welbourn who came from England in 1840. And he's settled in the area of southern Illinois, not far from Quincy, between Springfield and Quincy. There's a lot of agriculture, and Quincy was famous for stoves that would be built there up and down the Mississippi, and the women in the times had to have one of those stoves as they moved their way across the prairies. Well, he situated himself there, and the family grew, and he had brothers who settled in other parts of that part of the United States. Some went to Indiana. And then the Civil War came along, and he joined the, I guess it was the Illinois Volunteers, and he was later killed in, I believe, the Battle of Shiloh by rifle shot. And I have a copy of his death certificate, and my grandfather, who was born in a little town called Barry, which is not far from Quincy, he was named after his uncle, and my grandfather, taking that name, then started, lived in that area and went to business college in Quincy. And he then married a lady from Quincy, and he then went to work for the Santa Fe Railroad, and they moved to Topeka, Kansas, and that was at that time the headquarters of the Santa Fe. And as he worked within the main offices, he then rose to become the head of the passenger service section, and my father was born in Topeka, and he was named Junior. So when my father grew up in Topeka, he played sports and grew up and went on to college at Baker University, which is in a small town in southern Kansas, and it's largely a Methodist school, John. That's how it got its start.
Gotcha.
And it's since expanded immeasurably in the Kansas City area, where they have many ancillary organizations, and it's all part of the organization that was originally started in this southern Kansas town. Well, my father worked after he graduated from school in the oil business, and he got a job working for the National Supply Company, which is an oil field supply organization that their symbol really was the blue they used on the oil pumps and the equipment, and it was called National Blue, so you could tell their product ahead of others. And my father then was transferred to different parts in this western Kansas, southern, eastern Kansas with this job. And I was then conceived and born. My parents were married in the Topeka area, and then he was transferred to Hutchinson, and that's where I was born. And so he decided to make me Robert Alden Welbourn III. And my brother James Arthur Welbourn was born in Winfield, which is another small town in Kansas, where my father was transferred. And then we ended up in towns on the western side of Kansas, El Dorado and Chanute and other cities. And about that time, World War II broke out, and my father, because of his background in chemistry as well as engineering, was given a job at Boeing in Wichita, Kansas. And at that time, Boeing was one of the major, as they are today, manufacturers of airplanes, and the B-29 was conceived and built at that time in Wichita. And that was a bomber that was completely designed and built to surpass the B-17, which was the main workhorse of the campaign, mainly in Europe. But it had been built before World War II, and there were a number of deficiencies in it. So when the B-29 was built, my father was part of that group. In fact, as part of the testing, he was involved in that too. And that took him to journeys out in the South Pacific, where he went to Tinian and some other places where the super forts were stationed. And then he would come back to Kansas again and was exempted from the military because of that. Meanwhile, I started school in Wichita in the first grade. They didn't have kindergartens in those days. And in the first grade at John Adams was the name of the school. And I started, and then we were happily in Kansas when World War II ended on August 14, and I was born on the 15th of August, 1937, so I kind of took that as a great birthday present for me, too. And once the war ended, the war economy was continuing in some extent, and my father was invited to come to work for Douglas Aircraft in Santa Monica in California. And we were happy as a family to make that move. In the meantime, my mother really got us all together. And we ended up taking the train out to through the Southwest, an amazing trip to Los Angeles. And we landed, and we had relatives out here who had come in the 30s. So they then found us accommodations in the western part of Los Angeles, and I started school in the fall at the Palms Elementary School, which was located in a western Los Angeles county, not far from Culver City, if you know that's the independent city in the middle of Los Angeles. And so I did that, and I was kind of ahead of the game in some ways because it seemed like the schools were teaching us things that in the first grade that you didn't learn to the second and third grade. And in the Los Angeles schools, which were then laboring under so many students, they had to divide the classes in two, and you either had an A or a B for the third grade, all the way up and even to the time I was in high school. So my uncle, who also worked at Douglas, and my father, because of the housing shortage, decided they would build a home in the San Fernando Valley, which was over the Santa Monica Pass from where we lived. And they went out to the Walnut Acres, it was called, and they did build a place, and it's now called Woodland Hills. And I then continued school out there. And they then skipped me a couple of grades, or at least semesters, and because of that, we came back to town, as we called it. We considered about in Canoga Park and Woodland Hills being kind of in the walnut acres and orange trees and a lot of things out there. It was really a beautiful area, but we decided we were more citified, so we moved back to the Palms area, and I continued going to junior high, and I went to a school called Hamilton High School, named after Alexander Hamilton. It's located in Los Angeles, and it is a school that is kind of academically oriented, at least. We're proud of the fact that I would think at least probably 60% of the kids that graduated, maybe as much as 2/3, would go on to college. And many of them went directly to college. We had a couple of junior colleges not far away. Some kids went there, and USC is not far away either, and UCLA is practically within bicycle distance, and that, of course, was a popular school, too. So I went on to, and then we had the state colleges as well, and I went on to go to the state college in Los Angeles called California State University at Los Angeles. And after that, I had
East LA? Isn't it UCU?
It's in East Los Angeles, yeah. It's out near Alhambra, also out by Monterey Park in that area. So I used to have to drive back and forth, and that was really the freeways were just beginning at that time, so most of it was done on just regular roads. And I then ironically enough, applied to one school to go to law school, was USC. And I later found out that most people had applied to at least 5, sometimes 10, because you don't usually get your first choice, but I was lucky that I did. So in 1959, I started at the University of California School of Law. But I was lucky when I graduated in the summer, well, it would have been in June, that I was given an opportunity to take a fellowship and to go to the Institute of World Affairs, it was called, in Canaan, Connecticut, which is city in, a small town really in northwest Connecticut. And it's a school that is just given in the summertime and would bring together 43 students from 23 different countries, many of them on Fulbright scholarships from all these different places. And some of us were from California. There were some people from the University of California, all up and down the state, as well as all parts of the academic group that came together. And Arthur Smithies was the name of the director, and he held the Rope Chair of Political Economics at Harvard. And he would then bring guests to us on Saturdays, ambassadors from different countries, many Harvardian and Yale scholars. It was just a great opportunity to really study under some very interesting people. And it meant that I would be gone, and I was gone from the end of June until into August. And there were two students that I met there that one of them was a girl who came from Germany and a boy who later became I believe the Secretary of State, maybe for Austria. At one time he was in New York City as their consul general. And they had wanted to go across the United States, but couldn't afford it. Well, I had a stipend for transportation, and I made my first jet aircraft flight from Los Angeles to New York, and landed at Idlewild, it was called in those days. So I then took the money that I was going to use to go back to Los Angeles, and I found a man that had a Mercedes that he had imported to the United States, but it landed in New York. So I had to get it registered because he would let me drive it back to California. And the hard part was getting it registered in his name and getting insurance, because at that time New York had the policy that California does, that you had to have insurance in order to get the car registered. And we at that time in California allowed you to register the car, and if you had insurance, that was good. If you didn't, there was no penalty, unless you got an accident, and then you were penalized. So I then learned a little about the bureaucracy of the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles, because I went up and down many stairways from one insurance company to another. I was in a hurry in Manhattan, and sometimes you can get even locked out if you don't hit the right level. So I got the insurance and piled these two young people into the car with me, and it was a 220 sedan that was a standard transmission. It was really a nice car. So we started out, and we drove all the way across California, up to California, using, for the most part, the new interstate highway system that was still being completed all the way across the United States. And at that time, Eisenhower, who had instituted the program along with the highway lobby, you might say, was in full force. And we stayed at YMCA's as we came across, or the YW for the girl, in Chicago, also in Denver. And but when we got to Las Vegas, we decided we'd splurge and go out to a club or something.
Ooh, Vegas, huh?
Yeah, even Las Vegas. And funny enough, we saw the Grand Canyon, but from the north side, which is really an interesting trip, because it's, of course, closer to Las Vegas, but it's 100 miles from where the road runs all the way to the canyon. And the north side of the canyon has some wonderful facilities that had been built by the Santa Fe Railroad, interestingly enough, along their track as it ran into Los Angeles. So we came back. I dropped them off at, I guess it was UCLA, where they had friends and others, and then I returned the car to the man in Glendale that owned it, and got a ride home, and I was ready to start law school within the next couple of weeks. So in law school, I found that there were a lot of subjects that were very, very interesting, and a great time, and I was elected president of the first year class, which really doesn't mean much, but I joined the Phi Alpha Delta Law Fraternity, which is an interesting group. It's not a fraternity like you have in undergrad. They don't have a house and they don't have living quarters, but it's a professional group.
Where'd you throw the lawyer parties? Is it like
well, that's true. They would have some entertainment, and ironically enough, my middle son Edward, he joined Phi Alpha Delta unbeknownst to me when he went to law school in San Diego. But they have chapters all over the United States, and they, in some cases, are more active than others.
Isn't there a legal precedence? Isn't there a court order that bows aren't allowed to be anywhere within 100 foot of a fraternity?
I think the fraternities are just scared of what would happen. Yes.
Well, these fraternities are, you join them in law school and you get a plaque and it's signed and you put it on the wall, kind of a thing. But I still retain an alumni membership in it, and they're always sending me stuff that I'm not really terribly interested in, but, they send me letters and notices and all this kind of thing. So then after in my latter part of my law school, I got a job working as a counselor at Juvenile Hall in Los Angeles, which wasn't too far from the university, which is in roughly downtown Los Angeles. And I started working there from 2 in the afternoon till 10 at night, which was an interesting experience because the kids we dealt with were the major delinquents for Los Angeles.
Was it Mookie Williams one of your guys?
Yeah. Well, Mookie was, he wasn't called Mookie at the time, but he was there. And I had all, but at
so
that
those
time,
of you guys listening, you guys can do a Google search for Mookie Williams. He was the guy whose credit was starting.
We didn't really did have the gang problems. The Mexicans have had gangs, Mexican-American gangs, for a long, long time, going back to the 20s and the 30s.
Like
that was mainly
what's the big one? Like the White Fence?
Well, the White Fence was an early gang, and that was kind of from downtown and sort of in the area they called it Diamond, too, which would be off of Temple. And
every time I make the left turn off of on Anaheim, I get to see the Weemos. Get to see Weemos.
Well, Weemos is an abbreviation for Wilmington, and they got East Lagos and West Lagos, and it's awful hard to figure them out sometimes, but they've got their territories, and then suddenly in South LA started emerging the Pyrus, which were the Bloods, and then the others were the Crips. And the Crips had their little females that followed them around, and they called themselves the Cripettes, which I thought was funny. And even more funny is the name Crip. They decided, I guess, along the way that they wanted to have a name that was really scary. So what's more scary than when you go to the cemetery, you see a crypt, but they spelled it wrong. Instead, they forgot the Y, C-R-Y-P-T.
Well, they spelled C-R-I-P.
Yeah. Yes, that's how it was sounded.
So they spelled it phonetically then?
Phonetically, yeah. And so, whatever, so it's C-R-I-P-S, and they write it everywhere, and then it became more violent, it became that way. But
when did the violence start? I mean, because you grew up in Culver City. I mean, I remember, was it Judge Shook he went to high school in Compton?
No, he went to high school in southwest LA, off of Vermont and Western.
But I mean, these were white middle class neighborhoods.
Well, they were, white middle class, or in many times upper middle class and lower middle class. But they were all, most of the homes, at least where I lived, had been built, in the 30s and into the 40s and later because of housing shortage. They put a lot of tracts in, and that brought people. But I don't know. It was just a phenomenon of the area, and also a lot of guys that seemed to be at loose ends without any direction. They didn't have anybody giving them the kind of direction they needed within the school, within the home especially. And they started gathering and finding their associations and their lack of stability with the gang. And the gang then became more important than their own family in many ways. And then one guy that we're talking about, Judge Shook, a friend of mine, was a retired Superior Court judge. He went to a school that was a Catholic school down in that area, and at that time it was a nice area. He used to go to the Catholic church, and he was an altar boy and all that stuff. Well, the schools closed, and in fact, the McKeever brothers went there too, if you remember them. They were a couple of football stars at USC and also in the NFL. And that school, they've got many alumni, but everybody else is gone. And nobody, well, I can't say nobody, but very few Caucasian white people live in that neighborhood anymore. And then pretty soon we come along, and by 1964, 65, I become a deputy district attorney in LA County. And I had started in June, and the Watts riots, maybe you remember them, broke out in 1965. In August, so I was kind of a new guy on the job, but I was trying a case over in El Monte, which is a town out more towards the San Gabriel Valley. In fact, its claim to fame was it was the last stop on the Santa Fe Trail. As they would bring the herds west, they would pin them up in El Monte, and the buyers would come out from LA and then buy the cattle in El Monte. But El Monte meaning the mountain. So I'm looking down towards South LA, and a friend of mine who's the head of the office comes out and said, "Look at that fire, Bob. There's some bad shit going on down there." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, they're burning up stuff." So I said, "Oh boy." Well, I then called in, and to find out where I was be assigned on Monday, and I was told I was going to Compton, which is right in the middle of all of this. And I said, "How do I get through the police and the lines that are going to be there?" Because I had learned on Friday late that the lieutenant governor at that time, who was standing in for Pat Brown, who was the governor, had called out the National Guard.
Oh, no.
So the National Guard is there because the police, LAPD, weren't handling it, and the sheriff was involved too. So I ended up having to show my badge as I went through the police lines. And I rode the freeway down and then came through, and some DAs were carrying guns. I didn't have one, so I didn't have John then, so they weren't easily accessible. My father had a shotgun, I think, or two, but that was it. So I then was involved in the prosecution of a lot of people that were being hauled in Compton. We had a court with, I think there were 3 divisions at that time. It was a municipal court. And one of the judges who decided that this thing was getting out of hand, the poor people that had pled guilty a month before and were coming in for sentencing were now being sentenced in accordance with all the turmoil and problems that were going on. Mm-hmm. You know, they didn't, when they pled out, they didn't realize they were going to get a year in the county jail for something that ordinarily would have been 30 days. But, you know, the judges said, well, we got to set a standard here and not let these guys get by with anything. So that was my introduction to the DA's office, and I then was transferred to other places. And one of the places I ended up, where I stayed for almost a year, more than a year really, was in Redondo Beach, which is in the southern part of Santa Monica Bay. And Redondo Beach had this 2 divisions of the municipal court and then 1 division in Torrance, which is nearby. And they handled all the cases from let's say, north of Wilmington in Harbor City, and then over to what's termed Lomita, which starts on Western, and then it continues all the way up, and we had them to Manhattan Beach, and then all the Palos Verdes Peninsula, Torrance, which was the biggest city, in Gardena. So it was a large area that we were responsible for, and I got a lot of experience in a variety of things, and there were some good judges there that taught me a lot about the law. So I was later transferred downtown, where I was involved in the preliminary hearings and the prosecutions downtown and that kind of thing. But in the meantime, my second year of law school, I'd met a man who was the lobbyist for the motion picture producers at California Motor Car Dealers in Sacramento, and also he handled other matters too. So he had befriended me at a party for the Phi Alpha Delta Law Fraternity. Yeah, so it all worked, and I went to the backyard of a federal judge in an area called Hancock Park, which is an area of Los Angeles that old Los Angeles that had big homes and stuff was right there. So, at any rate, he was introduced to me to introduce me around, because I was a young guy that didn't know a lot of people, and he knew them all. So I then, he invited me to go to lunch, and I did later, and he said, well, when you get ready to decide what you want to do when you're a lawyer, give me a call and we'll talk about it. So I did that, and he then had told me that, he thought it would be a good idea if I got some trial experience. And one of the ways to get trial experience is getting the DA's office. So he put a good word in with our then district attorney, Evel Younger, and I then moved into that job. And so I then decided after, a little over 2 years in the DA's office, that I would become a lobbyist. I wanted to get into that area in Sacramento. And I took on a lobbying for the Automobile Association of Southern California, which is the AAA affiliate for, and all of the legislation they're involved in having to do with the roads, the highways, all the codification of the highway code, and of course the motor vehicle code, and changes that take place. And you'd work with the highway patrol, and you'd work with a lot of variety of people. In fact, there's more than you would imagine involved in that, because even the aggregate people, the ones who supply the stone for the roads, and the asphalt people, and the contractors, and they've all got these organizations which are their own particular point of view to get the legislators to think about it. Well, that was right at the beginning of Reagan's time in office. Mm-hmm. So I married John's mother in 1966, and we went to Sacramento in that year, and we went to the inauguration of Reagan's party at the fairgrounds in Sacramento. So we had a great time getting to meet people, and part of the job was to get to know these people better. And Doris is a good one to get along with people quickly, and so she did. They had a group of women that had an organization, and she became a member, and that helped us get together and do things better. But we were then commuting between Sacramento and Los Angeles, getting an apartment down in LA and moving back and forth, which really wasn't what I wanted to do, because along with Reagan, they had passed new legislation that made lobbyists full-time rather than part-time legislators as they had been before. Jess Unruh, the then Speaker of the Assembly, who's really a powerful politician, got that through. So we ended up then being told that it'd be better if you live in Sacramento full-time, and we didn't really want to do that. So we had bought a home in Palos Verdes Estates through a friend of mine from law school who had called and told me about it. And so...
Ironically, you still live there today?
Yeah, who? The guy?
Yeah. Yeah, no, they bought their home in what, 66?
We bought it in 1967.
Yeah.
In fact, November this year will have been there 50 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would you pay it off in 1982?
I paid it off when I got the bank case in 1990. One of the lawyers jumped from case to case, as the finances of it work out. But whatever, we then decided we wanted to stay there, and it was a house that needed to be painted and fixed up. We were only the second owners, and it had a swimming pool in the back, and it's a lovely area to live in. It's got a third of the city is set aside as parkland, it's called, which means it's open space, a little like John's place,
Okay.
You can't build on it. We've got CC&Rs running with the land that prevents you from building a house that doesn't conform to certain restrictions. You have an art jury to decide whether the house itself and the architect that you've hired and what he wants to do is going to blend in with the neighborhood. We've got a neighborhood compatibility ordinance which talks about you can't have a two-story where there aren't any others, and you can't just encroach on that parkland. It's song for song. And of course, the setback too is nice because you don't live right next to your neighbor, like often happens
in Newport Beach.
Yeah.
Newport Beach, yeah.
They always appreciate the setbacks of homes.
Yeah.
Because it kind of gives you an idea. Now all of a sudden these people get rid of the setback and they build it to the street. And you drive down the neighborhood and you see setback and you're like, that killed me about Newport.
Yeah. You used to talk about that when you were down there. And that's so true of so many cities, That's valuable land. And I'm thinking back to my old high school, Hamilton. I saw a picture the other day that I ran across in a newspaper clipping when the front of Hamilton had a beautiful grass lawn, and you drive by on Robertson Boulevard and see this because it's a big brick building, 2 stories and a copper on top.
What, have you seen it? Have you seen it recently?
Yeah, it's all
fenced.
All the grass is gone.
And it's all fenced and it's all parking lot.
Yeah, all parking lot for people to park on. You drive by and you barely see the beautiful structure.
Yeah.
And they have, of course, a big fence and a bunch of stuff. But so in Palos Verdes Estates, that is something that people have wanted to treasure and make an effort to continue over the year, and it has. And the city was incorporated in 1939 with its own police and fire, and it's in effect a charter city, although it's a general law, but that's what usually comes with them. And so we've maintained that over the years. And in 1974, after my son Rob, Alden IV was born, John's oldest brother, and then Thomas Edward, who was born about 2 years
72.
later.
Yeah, 72.
Yeah, he was. I then ran for city council in 1974, and I was elected for 2 terms of 4 years each. And I then became the mayor of the city and that kind of stuff. And John was born in 1976, and had the benefit, I guess, of going to the Palos Verdes Estates, Palos Verdes Peninsula School District, which is one of the best in the state of California, and they're all very proud of that because that keeps the property values up, and the students that go there are often tutored in many different ways, and they're even and once again, because of the neighborhood, and I think the pressure brought by the parents and bringing the academic standards up, every one of the kids goes on to college, or university. And my 2 older boys, Rob and Ed, went to the Claremont colleges, which are located out kind of in western LA County, not far from Pomona and the city of Claremont is where they're located. And the oldest one of those schools, Pomona, was founded before USC was started in about, 1883 or something like that, and USC was 1885. So that college atmosphere, out in that area has perpetuated itself, and they've added other schools, and it's kind of organized on the Oxford approach, where you can go to college in each one of the colleges and graduate from the one that you first enroll in. And so they also played athletics out there, and they had also been on the football team at Palos Verdes High School. And both Ed and Rob played on that team, and we'd bring John out with us to go to games and visit. And they took John out to parties when he was only 14 or 15 years old. And one day we're sitting I think it was having lunch, and he drank a yard of beer. That really shocked us. His brothers have been teaching him.
Little glint of pride in your eye, huh?
Yeah, what am I getting here? So John was very good at high school football, and All-American and all that kind of stuff. So we were proud of that, and his brothers, I think, did a lot, tried to help him learn how to be a good lineman. And then we would travel to different places where he would get invited for a visit, and we went to Colorado, and we didn't go to the one in Nebraska, but we certainly were following it, and down to USC, and then UCLA, and what was the other one? Berkeley, of course, and went up there, and he decided, kind of as a surprise to me, to go to Berkeley with the team. So that's where, and then we used to have a great fun as a family to travel to these places and watch football games and travel to different parts of the United States. We're like groupies, you might say, to go to these things and have a good time. So at any rate, I've been a lawyer now for over 50 years and got a certificate from the state of California, signed by the President of the State Bar of California and also the Chief Justice, acknowledging my 50 years of unblemished practice. So I'm well working on my second 50, and I'm still practicing. I have cases. In fact, when I go back today, I'm starting, I'll have day after tomorrow, an appearance where we're going to decide and probably put together a lot that we're going to use in a jury trial involving a robbery case. Originally it was also a kidnapping, but through a legal mechanism we got that dismissed. So I've finished another kidnapping case, and I guess it was the end of January. And I handle, for the most part these days, criminal cases. I've tried murder cases, special circumstance cases, all of them over the years. I don't, and I take appointments from the courts. We have an organization that's been for the county of Los Angeles where there's conflicts between the public defender and let's say you got 3 defendants, and you can't have the same agency representing them, so the public defender is one, and then they've created an alternate public defender separate and apart to handle the second one, but then they have to get a private lawyer who is paid by the county to handle the third one. Or it can be 5. Sometimes you get a gang case and it can be 10 different, and then the public defender, alternate PD, and then 8 private lawyers. So they don't pay you real well to do it, but it's county work, and you got to do that, and it's interesting, and you get to see a lot of your old friends when you go down and you see judges and people that you know and like.
It's probably more cost effective too, because with public defenders, I mean, you guys actually bring in seasoned attorneys, a part of those guys.
Well, that's true, and it moves faster. And then another thing, they don't have to worry about so much overhead. You know, the cost of these county businesses, they don't have to pay rent for me. They don't have to pay my malpractice insurance. They don't have to pay all of the things they have to, the indirects, for no retirement and, health and welfare and all the other things. So it's worked out over the years. It used to be they didn't have an alternate public defender and just used lawyers in that capacity. But some bright guy figured it out that they'd rather have the control of the lawyers by having an alternate agency to handle many of the conflicts. But that's just where it is in a nutshell. And now all of my oldest son, Robert IV, he's recently, within the last couple of years, had a son, and he's Robert V now. So I'll be around for a little while, and he has another boy named Nicholas, and then, of course, in between, John had the twins, and now he's got a year-old Cash, and then Ed, who has the oldest grandchildren, which are Luke, you know Luke.
Yes, sir.
And you know Alex, too.
Yep.
And they're good kids, and Luke is a good baseball player and likes all kinds of sports. And so does Alex. She's now learned to ride a horse, and she's got the all-star team in basketball. And everybody is really athletically oriented, which is a happy time because they've got a lot to do with themselves. And both of those kids are really exceptional students, too.
They're smart.
Yeah,
Luke's,
they really are.
Yeah, Luke's sharp. Dad, you have an interesting perspective, having grown up in, obviously come from the Midwest. I mean, you moved out, when you were 5 years old?
No, I would have been 8.
So 8 years old. So, I mean, for roughly, we're coming up on 72 years of living in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Probably within 40 miles, 50 mile really distance. I mean, Culver City to, Palos Verdes. I mean, really within that.
Palms is right across from Culver City, too.
I mean, but even,
even in the San Fernando Valley.
Yeah, Woodland Hills. But I mean, to see the difference in LA opposed from when you were, probably heading down to Venice to go sell, cones with your buddy at Venice Beach, or taking your 3-hour drive down to Huntington Beach. I mean, to see LA and see how much it's grown and changed over the course of these years.
Yeah, it's just been an amazing transformation. Of course, the freeways had a lot to do with that because it was now connecting distant communities, and of course, by putting them in, they had to take away a lot of houses that were in the way. So those houses would be removed and were sold, and then they were moved to different parts of Los Angeles. In fact, my old YMCA in Culver City was one of those houses they took off the freeway, and the Hollywood freeway, when it was put through. But that allowed people to move quickly, or faster than they ever did before. But it also permitted the developers to build a lot of towns, just like around here, where you see as you drive out 290 and 71, up on the hillside, there's all these homes that are reachable now where they weren't before, except in Los Angeles, as you probably know, you'd end up with a freeway instead of a 4-lane highway.
Right.
And there are freeways in Austin too, but I mean, not quite as big.
It's like, at least in LA, they had the foresight a little bit to realize that, hey, it was going to grow this much. Whereas people out here, they talk about traffic. And I'm like, the only reason you guys have traffic is because this is a 2-lane road. In LA, they'd have 7 lanes on either side, and they would never have any traffic.
True. In fact, they even realized that the original freeways aren't wide enough, and the 5, as it went from Orange County developed later than LA, and they were forward enough in their thinking to really make some wide freeways. But between Orange County line and the 705, which would be the Long Beach freeway.
710.
710, and then what's the other one? The
605.
Yeah, 305.
605.
605, right. Roughly 605 through Norwalk. They've just redirected the traffic, and they've just shot those, freeway boundaries out and in. And they've just talk about setbacks, and some of these buildings there aren't anymore. But it creates the way to do it, and they've often talked about double-decking them too, which would be a way that and in some cases they have, as you are on the Harbor Freeway, which is the 110, heading downtown, you get to a point where...
Well, we watched them build that. You remember we watched them build that for 20 years. I mean,
took a long time.
We always laughed at in Orange County in LA. I mean, I can remember the freeways being under construction when I was a little kid, and then all of a sudden, here I am, 40 years, living there my entire life, and all of a sudden seeing it open and being like, they've been working on this thing for like 40 years. I mean, just these projects, but it's just, the LA traffic is one. But if
And that's part of what we're talking about too, in terms of the influx of people. They had, the early aerospace industry was centered right within the airport around LA County. As you head south to at Long Beach Airport and south, my dad was a process engineer, and when he was assigned to work on a space program, they sent him down to Huntington Beach, where they had a big facility. So it was decentralized.
They still have that big facility in Huntington.
They do.
Question which I think is interesting. So obviously, as a young DA, you saw probably, not only shootings, robberies, all the different stuff, and then you all of a sudden go through this whole deal where all of a sudden the gangs get bigger, crack cocaine, and the drugs hit, and then we come out with Richard Nixon's war on drugs.
Right.
How did those pieces of the puzzle, where all of a sudden it went from a slap on the wrist with these drugs to all of a sudden making these major felonies? How did that really change in terms of the court system and who you represented and who you saw?
It, of course, as the government found that they weren't able to use a lot of the tools that they'd had before, and then when the gangs got involved, it became a way of making money to do the thing. And in the gangs, in the prisons, the bad actors that are sent to the prisons, and then when the Mexican mafia became such an organization that would then traffic on the outside and control what went on the inside, and then calling the shots from inside, and the government had to do something to try to keep that from getting beyond where it could be controlled. We're always playing catch up in a way, and then as the cartels down in Colombia and others were shipping the drugs north, and it just wasn't Southern Cal; it was all the west side, east side of the country, and it was just an inundation of what was going on, and some of the reaction was overreaction. The federal government started giving more time, prison sentences to crack, and if you got powdered, you didn't get as much. What's the difference? It's crazy.
Right,
well, is that racially motivated? They realized that the powder was probably the white guy snorting cocaine opposed from the.
Well, it's been said, but I don't really believe that was what it was about. They felt that the crack was more dangerous. That was the theory, and it was more concentrated. And that kind of thing. I believe that was it. But it turned out that, of course, a lot of the blacks would get caught with it and be sentenced. In fact, Obama had a program where he was looking at these overzealous sentences and was saying, wait a minute, let's change this around. But,
did you see a rapid change in violence when all of a sudden
that was true. There was more violence because they were talking about big money. And then at the same time, there were certain expressions of anti-social, anti-establishment. That's what the rappers were about in many ways. Growing up down in Compton, for instance, and you had, Tupac? Remember
Tupac?
Tupac, yeah. And that guy, and then they became rivals, and, he was killed by a rival. But, there was all of that happening too, and one of the way to get out of the ghetto was to become a rapper and make money. There were guys making dough, and now we've got, a pending murder case down.
Oh, with your boy, what's his name? The guy, Suge Knight.
Yeah,
he's an old pirate.
Yeah.
Yeah, Suge Knight, who was Death Row Records and all that.
That's right. That came right out of Compton.
Well, they were filming that movie straight out of Compton, which was the history of NWA, and he went down. Well, he was mad that he wasn't being represented well, so he went down there with a gun, and they got him on that. So he's probably.
And then he ran over a guy. Got pissed off in an argument, and he took his pickup truck and ran over a guy.
Got caught on video, right?
Yeah. And then he had a hell of a deal too. Eazy-E was the main player in there. He died of AIDS. AIDS, and then they had Suge Knight talking on tape, and I think it might have even been on TV, talking about how he how they get rid of people, that they put AIDS tainted blood in a hypodermic needle and send somebody in just to prick him.
Sure.
And so
They get a hot shot.
and then all of a sudden, which is standard deal they do in prison, they'll find a guy with AIDS, and then they put it to your neck and, hey, you do this or I'm going to shoot you with the AIDS. And so I mean I just it's pretty interesting if you look at the history of it, and having been there and seen kind of this evolution, and and also in the court system to see it. I mean, I remember one time we had a conversation. You were like, "Man, it was like a black plague or like a black cloud hit LA when all of a sudden that stuff. I mean, the gang violence.
Yeah.
I mean, because they even show it in movies like what was the movie? The real famous one with. Ice-T was in it, but it's like the not Colors, but Colors is another one. But it really like shows these kind of nice neighborhoods, and all of a sudden, 10 years later, it seemed like all of a sudden that stuff hit.
Yeah, and some of those guys have gone legit. They've tried. But another thing that happened was there were people evolving out of the neighborhood that decided they would try to intervene in gang intervention, and many of them were former gang members that either got married and decided, moved out of the area. It's the only way we could quit the gang, really. And they would come down and there would be gang truces and things like that, which were being fostered by intelligent people that decided we've got to do more than we've got to have an outreach program. And then part of the outreach would come from the federal government too, and others. They would say, let's start giving more aid and programs and things that were going to help. And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But then we had a second riot in LA, and that was in 1992, if you remember, and that's more recent. And that largely started
after the guys were acquitted over in Simi Valley after the meeting of Rodney King.
Rodney King. And Rodney King was, as you probably remember, an ex-con who got pulled over up in the San Fernando Valley and wasn't cooperating, so the officers are beating on him, and it was in tape by a bystander who got it, I don't know, was it... did we have...
it was a videotape.
It was a video camera. Video clip, something like that.
Yeah, it was a video camera. So
yeah, I remember that, but I just remembered how it got out there.
Well, the lady or the person filmed, I think it was a lady filmed it, and she gave it mailed it to the news network.
That must.
And then the news put it on, and then there was a big trial.
It just went viral.
And then they felt that the cops couldn't get an honest trial, so they sent them out to Simi Valley, at which point they were acquitted, and when they came out, they were acquitted.
Well, then before that happened, though, there was a big pressure about the problems at LAPD and mistreatment of blacks, and Rodney King and his lackluster life, but he gathered together a lot of people in South Central who were pissed off, and some of them rightfully so, about being mistreated when they're under arrest and that kind of thing. So they then decided they would send the trial of these officers out of the county because they felt they couldn't get a fair trial within LA County. They sent it to Ventura, and Ventura County is just north of LA, and it has two main cities, Oxnard and Ventura. And they held and they sent a judge from LA County to be the judge at this new location, who was a former public defender, a guy named Bird. And one of the big mistakes he made was releasing the jury verdict at the end of the day. He should have kept it till the following morning. Then it would have not had the impact that it did, but whatever. So they went up there, and this jury was, for the most part,
white retirees.
White people, and
6-year-old white retirees.
And they didn't have any investment in what had happened down in LA. So all of a sudden they came back not guilty, and everything blew up.
Yeah.
And then the people that lived down there were riding. There was one thing at Normandy and Florence, if you remember.
With Reginald Daniel.
There was a guy named Reginald who was driving his tanker down there, and he didn't
stopped.
take a detour.
Well, there were people in the streets
the
riding,
roadway,
and he stopped.
He stopped.
Instead of doing what he should have done, which is put your foot on the skiddy pedal and keep going and just run them over. I mean, he was in a he was a trucker. He saw the people and he stopped. And what's going on? And they pulled him out. And,
They pulled him out and beat the
oh
crap
shit!
out
They
of
hit him in the back of the head with a brick, and he lost his eye.
Permanent injuries. And then the police were trying to quell the riot and all this kind of stuff. So that ended up really inflaming it more. And then down in L.A., as often happens, a minority group will come to town and find that they want to get involved in businesses, and they had a large influx of Korean people, and they opened businesses down in South Central, offering groceries and tobacco products and
gas
kind of
stations.
little places where they were, and many times they were opening them up, for the convenience of the people in the neighborhood, and they weren't all liquor stores either, because there were a lot of liquor stores in South Central, but they used to sell cigarettes. A lot of the guys down there couldn't afford to buy a pack, but they used to get them for like a quarter or maybe $50. Well, the Korean merchants soon learned that they could almost get more than the cigarettes were worth, so they started charging them $1 a cigarette. Well, people were so pissed off about that, and they were just livid about it. And the outlet of their frustration and problems that they were seeking, they would, during this riot, burned out all of these Korean businesses, except a few of them that would give credit. And if they had the brains to give some credit to these guys, they said, he's okay. But there were, I don't know how many, 100 of them that were burned out. And that same thing happened in almost 30 years before, when you had a lot of businesses, furniture stores down there that were credit stores, and a lot of people had come down there and opened these up, and over the years they weren't giving the kind of service that they would have received otherwise, and they just took on those stores as well. So it was hard to get businesses to go back down and open, and they finally did, some Ralphs and others, and it also led to a big upheaval in the LAPD, where the chief ended up being, early retired, and they brought in
Willie Williams.
And they brought in.
What was the name of the guy, the white guy, the police chief?
Well, he had been formerly the police chief of Boston.
What was his
and
name?
Then he also in New York.
What was his name?
He's back in New York now.
I can't remember his name. He was.
I'll think of it.
Yeah, it'll come to me in a second.
But he brought in community-based policing. The idea that you can't just drive around the neighborhood in a police car with the guy sitting next to you. You got to get out of the car and get to know the people that you're working with. And he started this whole new thing. And he was brought in by a mayor who...
Tom Bradley.
No, Bradley hired Williams.
Oh.
And Williams was a complete failure, but they got rid of Williams, and then it was Hahn.
Yeah, Kenny Hahn.
Yeah, that James Hahn.
Yeah.
And he found, I think he has an Irish name.
Yeah, it'll come to me in a second.
But he had, and he still speaks with a Boston accent. And he's been involved in a lot of stuff, and he's back in New York. He'd been the commissioner of police there, and he got edged out by the mayor, the Italian guy who was the buddy of Trump's.
Hey, speaking of which, remember we had a conversation when this whole Trump thing was going on. You talked about your involvement with Richard Nixon and the silent majority.
In 1968 and 72.
So you were working as, you told me, the chair for the LA chapter of the Republican Convention, or the Republican Party?
Well, you see, I was involved in George Murphy's campaign for U.S. Senator. He was running for re-election in 70, and that's when I met George St. John and all these other people who were involved in that California Republic. And this one man had been Nixon's old partner when he was out of office, when he lost the 60 election, and when he ran in 62 for governor and lost to Pat Brown. During that framework, he was a partner in a law firm downtown. So out of that grew the group that later became the Creep Committee, if you remember that name. And that was Bob Dole that named it that, a Republican committee to re-elect the president. And I was involved in that and then later too, that campaign. And I was one of the principals in the Speakers Bureau. And so I would go out and speak to groups wherever I was invited, or debate. And one time I was invited out to debate Jerry Voorhees, was his name, who was an attorney from the eastern part of L.A. And had been a congressman back in the 40s. In fact, he was the congressman that Richard Nixon beat in 1948 when he ran and was elected. Was it 40? No. 1946, pardon me, when he was elected for the first time, and he had been a lawyer in Whittier, and this guy was the incumbent. And so I said, I feel privileged all these years later to be debating Jerry Voorhees. But at any rate, that was a shoo-in really for Nixon, because everything was just, who did he have to run against? The senator from South Dakota, McGovern, who was a very liberal guy. And that's why we could never make any sense out of that Watergate nonsense, because they didn't need to do it to win. It was just an ego trip on the part of some people.
But, like when we were talking about the Trump thing and the fact that, they were bussing in Amish and different people that had never voted before. And, people came out that had been in, and I remember you told me the story about Richard Nixon talking about the silent majority
That's right.
in this country. And if there was a way to harness this silent majority.
These are the people that will vote for us if we can find them. And that's what we were doing at that time. And one of the things that led me along, and I met along the way, was John Connolly, if you remember him. He at one time had been the governor of Texas, and he was in the car with Kennedy. Remember when Kennedy was shot in Dallas? And he had a bullet go through him too. Yeah, and he was a very interesting man. And he had decided to switch parties. And he had been a Texas Democrat anyway, which is like a Republican.
Yeah, California Republican and Texas Democrat about the same. It's just that, that Texas Republican is pretty far out there, in terms of what we're looking at.
Well, at that time, with LBJ and his power here, you were a pretty conservative guy, even though you're a... And Connolly was a fascinating guy. He had been a son of a woodcutter, and the Murchisons kind of made him go. And they're a big Texas family. And so I got to meet him at a men's club in Los Angeles, introduced to him, and he said, let's stay in contact. And it was after that, the Nixon campaign, but before Nixon resigned. And in fact, he at one time was named by Nixon to become the Secretary of the Treasury, I think, for a short while. And then he didn't know that all this stuff was going on, as most of the people in the White House didn't, that Watergate was going to topple him like it did.
But Nixon was a sharp guy. He was a smart dude.
Oh, very smart. And in a small group of people, he could be so engaging. He was very wooden when he spoke in front of large groups, in my opinion. But, gee, he could talk, and, it was... And I didn't get to know him very well, but, I was certainly excited about him in the sense that I would work for him for the presidency, especially against the people he was running against.
In contrast, Ronald Reagan. You knew Ronald Reagan and had met him.
Well, I didn't. I knew him, but I certainly knew that he was interested in political office, and I had friends who were Goldwater people. They were crazy about Goldwater. In fact, Goldwater's son was a partner in business with a friend of mine, and Gene Muller. They went to the convention, all that kind of thing. So Goldwater was the guy then on the horizon, and he was running against LBJ in '64, and that's when Reagan first surfaced as a political entity. Really, he had been in the background before, and had been a Democrat for all those years, and then here he ends up becoming a third-party candidate, you might say. And it didn't come to pass, but he then gave speeches endorsing Goldwater and would be on the radio and using his talent as an actor. You know, he was a great speaker and could really put across a message. And then he got back to California and they started grooming him to become the governor of in the race in 1966. And, you know, there were some big backers in Southern California that put it together. And really he was almost, I think, out of a job. He had been the General Electric spokesman on television, and they put the kitchens together and all of that. And he got too political or something, so he was ready to do something different. And next thing you know, they said, well, let's groom him, and we'll get a couple of the guys who are smart political operatives who were Spencer Roberts was the name of the firm. And Stu Spencer's still alive. Bill Roberts is dead, but he packaged Reagan. And Reagan, you know, was a good speaker, could remember his lines, and people knew his name. Yeah. And that really propelled him. And he's a very affable guy, and not a dyed-in-the-wool right-winger at all. You know, when he was governor, he signed the most liberal abortion law of any of the states that's still in existence.
Okay.
Yeah. He later said, I'm sorry I did it, but he did it. You know, he had a lot of things like that that were very, you know, certainly not right-wing Republican type of issues. Mm-hmm. So he then ended up being a governor in California and a pretty popular guy. He could reach across the aisle and handle things with the Democrats, and he could deal with others, and you know, and managed to you know, be what I consider a very successful governor. And then he went on, and I knew many of the people that worked with him. One fellow I'd been in law school with was his legislative guy, George Steffes. And being in Sacramento at that time was a good experience, dealing with the governor's office and all of these kind of legislative issues. But he then, you know, went on to become the president, and then when he ran against Ford, you remember when Ford filled out the unexpired term of Nixon. Then when Ford wanted to run for the next office, and you know, being the incumbent president, he really had the right to do that. They felt in the Republican Party there was a group that wanted to push Reagan, and at the convention, you know, he was a force they were contending with, but they managed to keep him from getting the nomination. And from probably Reagan's point of view, well, I don't know. He beat Jimmy Carter 4 years later, but he probably, the Republican Party would have been mad at him for having taken
Ford's
the president, the incumbent down, which they would have felt that Ford was do that job because he had stepped into it. Plus, he had pardoned Nixon, so that later came to haunt him, as a matter of fact. But and then everything else is history. And well, I didn't tell you about one of my enterprises. I got involved. Well, it would have been in the early '80s of going to China and manufacturing in Chinese company down jackets, and they were knockoffs for some very popular brands that were made here. And I and a fellow that is father of a friend of John's, he was in the sunglass business, and he would work for Ice Ski, which was a sunglass outfit that had a sticker on the side, and he would go out to all of the Southeast Asia army bases, and they would sell to the PXs and that kind of thing. So he had contacts, and he and I put this together and went to Shanghai and started bringing them here and selling them, and we still got some left. And then he decided to go in a different direction than I did, so he brought another partner in and bought me out. But it was a grand time to be there because in those years Nixon had just come to China in, what was it, 76, 78, something like that. So we were still an oddity, and you'd go running in Shanghai, and I was the tallest guy on the street. And they'd want to stop and talk English with you because they wanted to sharpen up their skills. At that time, Mao, I don't believe, was still in charge, but Zhou Enlai may have been. And so it was still walking around a Mao coach, and the people that in China, you could tell where they were economically by the cut of their cloth and the texture of it. The bosses had the finer stuff, and they'd also, be able to drive cars and live in nicer places, but it was a tremendous time. We were buyers. We were we were
merchants.
Well, that's
bandits.
Part of it, but we were businessmen.
Yeah, bandits.
And the guy that got us the connection was an Italian who manufactures Dolomite ski gear, if you know that name. And so I did that for about 4 years, and I didn't lose any money, let's put it that way.
It's always a good thing.
Yeah. So that was pretty good, and, we're so happy that John is, my wife and I, is carrying on what he had started in Los Angeles and Orange counties. And continuing to do this kind of thing. I'm surrounded by people that are as interested as he is making this work and moving forward on a philosophy that I think will prevail in the end, and we can move from what had been CrossFit football to a much better way of handling that kind of a fitness program that's, I think, America's overdue in hearing about.
There was an old story of lifting weights. Let's just count to 10 over and over again.
I told them the story about when I told you I wanted to lift weights, and you were like, just count to 10 over and over again. You'd be a real dummy to do that stuff. And so, he's like, I'd say we're going to get you anywhere. And I'm like, look, guys, lifting weights thing got me pretty far.
Yeah,
so.
It sure has.
Well, I guess for the listeners,
I'm not sure about the dummy part, though.
For the listeners, I mean, every time we come to a family gig at John's house, it's like Bob always holds court, and people are just kind of sitting there. So we thought it'd be a cool experience to just get some story time, and I think that's what we've accomplished. I know you have a flight to catch, don't you?
We do. We're due out at 5:55, and
I'm sure Bob
John's
is.
driving.
Doris already came and gave you the.
Well, my mom believes in getting to the airport, 7 to 9 hours early, just to make sure there's any problems in that. Whereas my dad's like me, where it's 25 minutes is
You can come and deny this if you like.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I guess that's a wrap. Thank you very much for hanging with us on our 200th episode, and hopefully we'll be around for 200 and more.
Let's do it.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Now it's time for you to empower your performance. 200 episodes in, and we are still shamelessly promoting ourselves. Remember that to truly incorporate the Power Athlete methodology, you need to wrap your mind around the science. With the Power Athlete Academy, you'll be able to confidently apply our training systems and even create your own based on the knowledge you'll gain from this comprehensive course. Guaranteed to make you smarter and better looking, the Academy will challenge the old noodle and promote an almost offensive degree of vascularity. And now I leave you with some words from the ever coy, always reserved Doris Welbourn.
He wants the whole court there, the judge and everyone, and then he wants to come in like King Robert. I like to go to the doctor maybe 10 minutes ahead of time so I can start making the nurses nervous. So I just stood up and said, "This is over, get out." So he said to me, "This is my office."
I can't believe that.
Why do you not have good memories about your mother?
Until next time, bye!